There's a knock at the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just persistent enough to make your chest tighten. You freeze. Your eyes flick toward the living room. Dirty dishes you didn't wash, clothes you didn't fold, the faint smell of a space that finally feels like yours again. The knock comes again, and this time, your body reacts before your mind does. A subtle spike in heart rate, a tightening in your throat, a strange irritation that feels irrational but undeniable. Because deep down, you already know the truth. It's not the guest you're avoiding, it's what happens to you when someone enters your space. Why does something as simple as a visitor feel like an intrusion, even when you like them? Why do some people feel drained before the conversation even begins? And why does the idea of having guests over trigger discomfort, anxiety, or even quiet resentment in otherwise normal people? This isn't about politeness. It isn't about introversion either. Something deeper is happening inside the mind, something tied to territory, control, and the silent psychological boundary between self and world. So the real question is this: why does the human mind react as if a guest is not a person, but a disruption? Segment 1, the territory instinct. Long before modern psychology gave it a name, humans already understood one thing: space equals safety. Not just physical safety, but psychological stability. In the early stages of human evolution, territory wasn't luxury, it was survival. A controlled space meant predictable threats. Uncontrolled space meant danger. This is where the concept of territorial cognition emerges in neuroscience. The brain doesn't just see your home as walls and furniture, it encodes it as an extension of the self. A study in environmental psychology from University College London found that personal space activates regions in the brain associated with self-representation, especially the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and identity regulation. In simpler terms, your brain treats your home like part of your identity. So when someone enters that space, something subtle happens. It is not just a social interaction. It is a neurological disruption. The brain begins recalibrating everything: how you sit, how you behave, how you speak, how you are perceived. Even the smallest guest becomes a monitoring presence, and monitoring changes behavior. This is tied to a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the Hawthorne effect, where people modify their actions simply because they know they are being observed. But here's where it gets darker. The amygdala, the brain's fear processing center, doesn't fully distinguish between threat and intrusion. So even a harmless guest can activate low-level stress responses. Not fear, but something quieter: tension, like the nervous system is whispering, "You are not fully alone. Adjust." And adjustment is exhausting. This is why some people don't realize they dislike guests. They only realize they feel relief when the door finally closes again. Segment 2, the social performance drain. There is another layer to this psychology. When someone enters your home, they don't just enter your space, they enter your unfiltered self. But the human mind is not comfortable being unfiltered in front of others, so it creates a performance. You become slightly different, more polite, more aware, more structured, more controlled. This shift is governed heavily by the prefrontal cortex, which manages social behavior and impulse regulation. But maintaining this social version of yourself requires cognitive energy. Psychologists call this self-regulation depletion. Every smile that isn't fully felt, every conversation you guide, every moment you adjust your behavior, it all consumes mental resources. A famous study by Roy Baumeister on ego depletion showed that self-control is not infinite. It weakens with continuous use, like a muscle under strain. So when guests stay longer than expected, something predictable happens. Your mental energy starts collapsing inward. At first, it feels like mild irritation, then fatigue, then a strange emotional withdrawal. You stop engaging not because you dislike the person, but because your brain is trying to recover itself. There's also something more subtle happening. Your hippocampus, responsible for memory association, starts linking guest presence with loss of autonomy. Over time, even the anticipation of visitors can trigger discomfort before they arrive. This is why some people begin cleaning excessively, organizing compulsively, or even avoiding invitations altogether. It's not about cleanliness, it's about control restoration. Because when someone enters your space, you lose micro-level control over your environment. Noise levels shift, timing shifts, attention shifts, even silence disappears. And the brain interprets loss of control as instability. And instability is something the human nervous system is built to resist. Segment 3, the modern isolation paradox. Here's where psychology becomes even more interesting. Because in the modern world, something strange has happened. We are more connected than ever. But personal space has become more sacred than ever. Why would we? Because digital life has already overstimulated the social brain. Messages, calls, notifications, constant visibility. Your mind is already in a semi-permanent state of social exposure. So when someone physically enters your home, the last uncontaminated space of privacy, the contrast becomes extreme. It feels invasive not because people are bad, but because silence has become rare. There's a phenomenon in environmental psychology called restorative space theory. It suggests that humans need environments where attention demand drops to near zero for psychological recovery. Your home often becomes that space. So when guests arrive, even pleasant ones, your brain interprets it as recovery interrupted. This is also where we see activation in the default mode network, a brain system associated with rest, self-reflection, and identity consolidation. When guests are present, this system quiets down. You lose internal processing time. You lose emotional recalibration. And over time, your nervous system begins to associate guests with interruption of self-repair. There are also cultural dimensions. In societies with dense living conditions or high social obligation norms, people often report higher social fatigue thresholds. In contrast, cultures that emphasize individual space show stronger protective responses to home intrusion. But regardless of culture, the underlying mechanism remains the same. The brain is constantly balancing two needs: connection, autonomy, and guests temporarily shift that balance toward connection, whether you want it or not. Even hospitality becomes a form of psychological labor. And when that labor accumulates, the mind begins to resist it, quietly, not with rejection, but with avoidance. The twist. It's not about guests. Now here's where everything flips, because this isn't actually about guests at all. Think about it. Have you ever felt that same discomfort? Not when someone enters your home, but when someone enters your time. A message you don't want to reply to, a call you don't feel ready for, a request you don't have energy to answer. That same psychological pattern appears again. Loss of control, performance pressure, cognitive fatigue, need for recovery. You might not hate guests, you might just hate interruption. Because modern life has blurred the line between social interaction and psychological exhaustion. Even silence now feels like something you have to protect. And the most unsettling part, the brain doesn't differentiate between physical intrusion and emotional intrusion very well. To your nervous system, a guest, a notification, and an unexpected demand all trigger the same internal negotiation. Do I have the energy to accommodate this? And sometimes the answer is no. Not because you are antisocial, but because your mind is still trying to return to itself. So the next time you feel that strange resistance before someone arrives, it's worth asking, is it the person you're avoiding or the version of yourself you have to become when they're there? Because somewhere between hospitality and exhaustion, the brain draws a line most people never notice. And once you see it clearly, you start noticing it everywhere. In conversations you delay, in messages you ignore, in moments you choose silence over response. And the unsettling truth is, the mind was never designed for constant access. It was designed for boundaries. And the moment those boundaries begin to blur, you don't just lose privacy, you start losing yourself in fragments of attention you never agreed to give away. And that is why you need to watch the next video.